So, you watched European companies, especially tech manufacturing, trying to enter or operate in Japan. What's the most common mistake you see them making?
They look at Japan as an economic engine and they think, this is untapped, our niche is there. We have to take the chance to go to the show and have meetings and do deals. Now, you can have meetings in a show in Japan, but the deals won't be done in the meetings. The deals will, if done, will happen probably 6 to 9 months later. The sales cycle is extremely long in Japan, and it's too long for many people. This long sales cycle is painful and in some cases not tolerable for some European companies.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Asia AIM, the podcast that shines a light on the people, ideas, and innovation shaping business, marketing, and communications in Japan and across the APAC region. I'm your host, Robert Heldt. Today, we're getting into something I see come up again and again, the gap between how European companies think Japan works and how it actually works. And to be fair, the reverse is just as true. To help us break that down, I'm joined by Richard Mort. Richard is a British strategic intelligence consultant who spent 24 years living across Singapore and Japan. He has a Japanese permanent residency, works across 4 languages, and is now based in Düsseldorf, which, if you didn't know, is a home to over 500 Japanese companies, and it basically is Germany's little Tokyo. Richard runs something called the Human API, and what he does is genuinely unusual. He maps entire business ecosystems. We are talking trade shows, startup networks, cross-border business flows, and then he publishes deep forensic breakdowns of how they actually work. He's written over 130 long-form articles on LinkedIn, including one called How Japan Links in Without LinkedIn. This really unpacks parallel networking world that most professionals in Japan actually use. We'll drop that article link in the show notes. It's well worth your time. Please read it. What makes this conversation different is that Richard sits on the fault line. Having experienced Japan thoroughly, he now observes from Düsseldorf the daily struggles of European companies attempting to enter this complicated market and then pinpoints the recurring failures in that transition. In our conversation, we'll get into what European tech and manufacturing companies misunderstand about Japan, what Japanese companies misread about Europe, and what really happens on the ground, especially at trade shows, where both sides often end up talking past each other. So let's get right into it. Richard, I'm delighted to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Robert. Hello, everyone, wherever you're listening in the world or watching. A really pleasure to be here. Myself and Robert have been in touch for a while. I believe we have quite a lot in common. As Robert kindly said, I had 20 years of my life in Japan, 5 in Singapore, so a quarter century in Asia. I now find myself in Germany. I've lived here for 5 years. And I consider myself a bridge between Japan and Europe, which you alluded to in your comments. The thing is, as you were speaking, I was thinking, is a bridge the right word? I think so, but the shape of the bridge, the length of the bridge, and the nature of the bridge change depending on circumstances, depending on which companies or people are involved, which part of Japan, which part of the culture. And I think that's why we need a podcast to kind of defragment it, and get the gold out of it. So I'm looking forward to trying to do that with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. So you call yourself the Human API, which is a really great name, by the way, but probably means a lot to a lot of people. In practical terms, what does your work actually look like day to day?
Yeah, thank you. Very good question. I'll just give a bit of context on that one, because in Japan, I was always self-employed. I wasn't working in a big Japanese firm. I did work with these companies, but it was on my own terms as a self-employed person. And back in the day in Japan, I came to Japan in 2002, and I was a translator for many years. My career has always been language focused. I did French and German university. I learned Japanese in Japan. And when I came to Japan in the early 2000s, translation was a very healthy career. The work was basically like an unlimited flowing river. I would wake up in the morning and in my email be waiting, many jobs would be waiting. And basically when I'd finished them, new jobs would come. So the pipeline was very healthy. And, as they say, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So that was quite lucrative and a good way to make money and enjoy the country. I traveled around the whole country, 44 of the 47 prefectures. But there comes, everything has its time. And as we know, translation these days is a very different looking field. Over time, the focus on translation changed. I also did tourism in Japan. I worked for JNTO. Before Corona, Japan was the fastest growing tourist market in the world. I actually created content for them because I'm European and I traveled around Japan as a European in European eyes. I know what, Europeans would want to see in other people, but I also have a Japanese wife and two kids. So I like to see both sides. And so tourism. And then when it came to Germany, it was another pivot, I would say, because Germany is the home of the trade show. Trade shows are important in most countries. In Japan, I used to go to Makuhari Messe, a big site. I used to think, this is massive. This is very epic size. When I went to Germany, it's a whole different scale. You have trade shows which are 3 or 4 times bigger than Makuhari Messe. So I did go to some, and I felt when I went to these shows, the website or the app was never really giving me the full picture. It wasn't fit for purpose. How can I change this? What I did was mapping forensically the event, who's going, the companies, sorting, screening, and putting it on one place online, which is often a LinkedIn article. This achieved great success, I would say. The inbound, the response was really phenomenal, and it taught me that I've just tapped into something here which is quite unique. So again, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So 140 or so articles later, I know I mentioned you, Robert, and that's how we got in touch. So I think it proves the point. The fact we're talking now is literally because I wrote an article which mentioned you. So I feel like, it's been quite good for me. But yeah, we can develop that a bit more. But yeah.
Sure. No, I mean, I just wanted to get into this forensic mapping, and how you go about it, which you touched upon a little bit. But so what does a normal attendee miss, whether they are an exhibitor or just a delegate or, a speaker, or maybe somebody just attending to make connections? What would they miss that you pick up in your forensic mapping?
Okay, well, I won't cover every angle, but I'll give you a typical angle, which is, I'm in Germany and many Japanese companies come over because I live in the Japan part of Germany. I mean, my city is the biggest community of Japanese people in Germany. So we have many trade shows, some of which are the biggest in the world of their kind. And what you find is when a company from Japan comes and buys a booth, the booths, they cost big money. It's tens of thousands of euros. It can be 50,000 euros for a week. So it's a major investment. If you're going to invest that much money, plus the cost of the flights and the hotels and so on, then the ROI has to be guaranteed, or in theory, yes. But is it? Now, for me, if you don't do the hard work 2 or 3 months in before the trade show and research every detail, then you're not going to have a perfectly optimal experience at the trade show, which means you'll meet people, but they may not be the best aligned from 5,000 companies, which are the best aligned companies and people. If you rely on the app or the business matching options they give you, I don't think you're going to get this kind of perfect alignment. So my take on that would be, I can map it out. I can literally create a big Mount Fuji of data of every attendee, every company, and every speaker. I'll arrange that in a way that's most logical and most easy to understand, and I will put it online. Now, I'm changing that modus operandi because, it's not sustainable forever. I want to, obviously, that's my work, but I had to show my value first. So I did that a few times, and people were blown away. People who go to these shows, they were very grateful that I was often invited to come meet people. And it's a way of kind of showing, you have to show your value in some way. And I don't like to call and say, can I pitch to you? It's more like, it's there, it's a living document. People see it, people notice it, and they come to me. And I think it's the gold standard, isn't it? Outreach is definitely this place for outreach. But if people come to you, that's the ideal, I would say. So that's what I'm aiming for. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So, you watched European companies, especially tech manufacturing, trying to enter or operate in Japan. What's the most common mistake you see them making?
Well, many, as you probably know yourself, but I would say that they look at Japan as an economic engine, still number 4 in the world, used to be number 3, number 4, I think. And they think this is untapped, our niche is there. We have to take the chance to go to the show and have meetings and do deals. Now, you can have meetings in a show in Japan, but the deals won't be done in the meetings. The deals will, if done, will happen probably 6 to 9 months later. The sales cycle is extremely long in Japan, and it's too long for many people. There are very few exceptions if you're a very young startup and, in a very specific niche, but by and large, this long sales cycle is painful and in some cases not tolerable for some European companies. The other thing is, I think many people have this perception that if they learn Japanese or they have a fluent Japanese speaker with them, okay, that's fine. Everything is solved because, we say our thing and they interpret for us. And my take on that is also, if you have good Japanese, it's definitely helpful. But if you get to a standard where you speak Japanese 90% like a native or, very well, let's say proficiently, then the rest of your energy should go on the cultural part. You're going to open more doors if you know Japanese culture, if you go out of your way to find topical issues, if you talk to Japanese on their level, like where they're from, you find out about their town, you've been there, that work is never wasted. And one example I could give you, I've often worked as an interpreter in Germany for Japanese companies. When I started doing this interpreting, which is harder than translation, but needs must, it's more AI proof, so I do it. You research the company, so you get PDF files, you get the website, and I make a bound Fuji of data, and I would make multiple efforts to make what I call a cheat sheet of technical terminology that I should know when I'm doing the job. But before the event, you have the pre-event nerves. You think, okay, I need to have all these machine spec in my head. The customer's going to come. But over 50% of the effort is actually not that. It's how you handle people. It's simple as that. It's how you handle the Japanese people. I did YNT about 2 or 3 weeks ago in Düsseldorf, and it was a Japanese company, 4 days from Iwate. I went to Iwate. It was a very nice prefecture, and they liked that, the fact I'd been there. The other thing is, after the event, they give a testimonial. Well, they give you a review, all 4 members of the team. And I got a good one, I'm pleased to say. And one thing is, it's exhausting working a trade show. You're on your feet for 8 hours. And I hardly sat down. And the lady who was at the booth, she said, I noticed Richard hardly sat down. I was very impressed. And I wasn't trying to prove anything, but I just felt like perception-wise, it's very important for Japanese people. If you sit down when no one's there, it just gives the wrong impression. And that is a tiny thing for Europeans, but for Japanese, it's not a tiny thing, is it? So, I think this kind of thing is important.
Yeah, no, the minute details, right, that you think doesn't matter and you don't pay much attention to it. And actually, the other side is actually paying a lot of attention to it. And that's what they care about, right? I'm curious, you mentioned startups there. You've mapped 32 European startups with Japanese investors. Details really matter, right? So what are the, specific things that they are missing? You mentioned, they're often flying blind. What do you mean by that? What does it look like in practice?
I think, okay, flying blind would be if you have a product, for example, which has succeeded in multiple markets in Europe, possibly America as well. You think by nature of this, extrapolating this, Japanese people need this as well. We're going to be successful. The thing is, human beings make decisions based on emotion, and Japanese market is quite special in some respects. Once you're over the initial hurdle of winning the customer trust, is very solid, and the churn rate is very low. But winning that trust is a huge hurdle, and I think the effort required to do that is much more than most startups realize. I did a talk to startups recently on, Sushi Tech Tokyo is happening, I think, today. I think it's last day today.
Yesterday, I think, yeah. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I finished yesterday, but I did it. One of my mapping was on that event, and I know the people who organized it. I did my forensic mapping. I connected with the people who organized it. And I would have liked to be there, but I will be, I think, in Japan in a couple of months. But anyway, I feel like, talking of detail, I'll give you one example. I wanted to give them a workshop before they went to Tokyo. So I thought, how can I do this? And trust is non-negotiable in Japan. So I found this website, which is interviews with Japanese company presidents, all in Japanese. And this is the kind of detail I mean, which will probably seem outrageous for some people, but, it's like 200 or 300 interviews here. I literally would go through these. I'd find a way to get the data of all these interviews. And I'd think which company, which president is best aligned with what I want to, the message I want to give, which is trust is important. I found this guy who has a seeds company, and literally he's Yokohama, he's running a seeds company. So the nature of seeds means you don't get instant return, right? It's months later. He said, our product only shows the return in 6, 9, or 12 months, when customers plant the seeds. I like the phrase planting a seed, which is very relevant for Japan. So he said, without trust, it's impossible. The customer has to believe that our product will blossom, will grow. And this is not. And I found a 30-second clip of him saying that, and I took it and I edited it, and I dubbed it into German because tools these days you can do many things. And I know it's very kind of like outside the box, but that's me. And I shared it on the presentation because I felt like it was a good example of the lengths that if you really want success, go to this much trouble and it will not be wasted effort. Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating what you've done there. Talking about going deep with your pieces. I'm interested in your piece about how Japan links in without LinkedIn, right? And the entire networking ecosystem in Japan is different. So, what's the biggest implication of that for a European company that's trying to build relationships here? Can you break down what you talk about in that article?
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Well, that was a good article to describe because it was the most viral one I did so far. It literally got 50,000 views in a week. And when I did it, my top of mind for me wasn't I want to go viral. It was more like it's always value, relevance, insight. It's maybe VRI is the kind of thing I have top of mind. When I write an article, I want to be as valuable, relevant, and insightful as possible. That's top of mind. And so I thought, well, Japan, 4 or 5% of Japanese people at most use LinkedIn, which I think, we're connected in that way. Most of people watching would have LinkedIn, but many Japanese don't. But it's still a very big world economy. So the thing is, it involves rethinking many, many things because most countries use it these days or they have equivalents, but Japan is different. Just the physical swapping of cards. There are many trade shows in Europe where almost no one except Japanese people swap the paper cards. But in Japan, it's pretty much you need a paper card. And the apps, for example, are designed around that. So 8, for example, is scanning the paper card, which you get from a Japanese person, into a database. And if they change the job, it updates it. It's very clever. But, and I wanted to do an article which in one place gives the whole picture of the market for Japan for business networking. And it's quite ambitious, but I feel like, 100 or so articles later, it's go big or go home, literally, for me. It doesn't really intimidate me. It's more, it stimulates me. If I have a high goal or an article which is challenging, I think I would give a better result. So I gave a Facebook example. Yeah, you go to Japan, you might get added on Facebook. And, Europeans, it's past the peak, I don't use that much. I keep it because lots of photos from my past are there, but I don't actively go and add people on Facebook these days. But in Japan, it's still a big thing, the specialist groups on Facebook, which might seem a bit strange for some people. And I feel like if you Google Japan LinkedIn, you'll see some articles about why it's not popular. And I went to LinkedIn office in Japan because for me, well, the Japanese you do find on there are high value people because they are people who understand the value. There are some students there who I think are doing great. You have Blue Ocean. How many of your peers are here? Not many. You have a real chance here. Use it. There will come a time, I think, where Japan embrace it more than now. Maybe not as much as we do in Europe, but I feel like it's a very slow work in progress. And I don't know. I'm answering your question, hopefully.
Yeah, no, totally right. Yeah. No, I think, when you talked about, the way LinkedIn works, I think, and the importance of that business card, Meishi, right? And when we work with global companies entering Japan, we try to do the same. We have a pre-briefing session with them. We have a few sessions with them, tell them how everything works and tell them to make business cards in Japanese. And then when they get here, we tell them how to go about presenting that business card. It's the cultural connection, but Japan is not fully analog. Like you mentioned, us 8 by San, Wantedly, all of them, they then take that analog and convert into digital. They take the traditional and then make it digital. And then you continue to have that digital connection, right? So I think that's really interesting. But I'm curious, if you're a if you're a German manufacturing company trying to reach Japanese buyers, where do you actually start, right? Like if the other way around, you can go on LinkedIn and look for, counterparts and find somebody and then make an outreach. But if you're a German company, where do you start? What do you do?
Yeah, very good question. So as you mentioned, there's hundreds of Japanese companies here, subsidiaries, often they're subsidiaries of major Japanese companies in Japan. So if I was a buyer here and I wanted, for example, I don't know, I could say, okay, it's wire and tube, so selling wire to Japan, or something unique to Germany, because Germany obviously is still a strong manufacturing company. What I would do would be, I would probably research in my usual depth. I'd find the 2 or 3 Japanese subsidiaries who are best aligned with that area, and you have to work through them. They have to be the bridge, because Japanese people in Japan will always listen more to Japanese people who are kind of the introducers, or the trust markers. If they listen to you and if they refer you, then that's a great sign. That's like a stamp, a stamp of approval. And in Japan, when you're doing business, you need that stamp of approval. It's a gray area for us, but in native Japanese, a person they consider a peer to say, this is a trusted entity, this is legitimate, this is valuable. I think that is a huge thing. And I think finding that a way to get that, a testimonial, for example, would be very valuable. That would be where I would start. The second thing is, I like when you do ecosystems, you have associations and groups of companies. In Germany, for example, we have associations of everything. We have Japanese legal people. We have anything you could think of, wire manufacturers nationwide. There's usually an association or, an NGO. Japan also has many. I find that if you forge a warm relation with the people who organize that, it's like you're on the hub. You're on the hub, and you try to imagine if you're get on good terms with the person who's the chairman or the president of that organization or a chamber of commerce. That's a great start, isn't it? Because they have access to so many other people, and they can be your introducer or your trusted, referral person.
Yeah. So what you're referring to is this role of what we call in Japanese Shokai-sha, right? Shokai.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. How do you make that introduction? And what I'm hearing you say is that European companies tend to take a cold approach and rely on trade shows rather than finding an intermediary who's probably well connected with your target client, and then building the relationship with the intermediary, whether it's an association, trade association, or whether it's a subsidiary company, and then make the approach with your target client. Is that what you're suggesting as a path to?
I just feel like, okay, JETRO, for example, JETRO has offices worldwide. We have about 4 in Germany. So I think we have Berlin, Munich, Düsseldorf, and Hamburg, So again, JETRO, the idea of JETRO is to be a bridge between Japanese companies who want to trade overseas in a much smoother way, and other way around as well to a certain extent. So they have many events, not just trade shows, but they have, seminars, workshops. We have a Japanese Chamber of Commerce in Düsseldorf, for example, with 400 or 500 members. They have regular events. So I'm thinking to myself, you need to have some kind of bridge or some kind of warm relationship. If you don't go to a subsidiary, you have to find some way of getting access to Japanese people who are either in Europe in person, or let's say Japanese people who are in Japan, but they have regular experience overseas. I have helped, a company president who came over to Cologne, with some people from one of his client companies, and they wanted to go up Cologne Cathedral, the most popular thing in Germany. So I went with them. We took them out for German lunch, and I mapped out a trade show for them in Cologne. But again, he was a guy who's internationally well connected. You need someone like that. I think you need a Japanese person who understands Europe and the world. They exist, they're not, not there. It just takes some research, I suppose.
Sure.
But that would not be wasted. You need a friend overseas who can be your link.
Yeah, I agree. And, as we both know, in Japan, real decision making does not happen, during the meeting. It happens before the meeting, after the meeting, through this, intricate process of Nemawashi, consensus building. How do you explain this to Europeans when you're working with German companies? This concept of Nemawashi, how do you break it down to them? How do you prepare them to be prepared?
Yeah, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because it's all shapes are different, and no one size fits all approach. There's no silver bullet there. But one thing I would say is one thing I read recently, which really resonated with me, was when you have this Nemawashi, you might look at the company and think, okay, where are the conduits? Which areas of the company do I need to target? Which people? The thing is, it's not even the present employees only. It can be the ex-president, the person who was the butcher or the department head. This is the thing. It's quite complex. It's not just the people who are in place now. It can be the people who have a relationship with the company, who own the building that, So it's a really complex ecosystem. And I think to really find out, you need to go through meetings with these people, which don't seem like meetings. They seem like social chats. These meetings in Japan, which we have, you must have had them yourself, and I've had them myself, and they ask you, I was playing tennis. Did you see the football yesterday? Or, I don't know, Kawaguchi's playing in England. It's very kind of like a small talk, but it lasts a whole meeting. And you think, why am I talking about this stuff? Let's get down to business. But unless you do this kind of what we think is just small talk, it's a ritual and it needs to happen because it's a trust. It's like building trust. It's building a human relation. I think more than any other country, you're judged in Japan on how well they think you'll be to work with. De-risking is an obsession in Japan, and part of the risk is unknown character. And they have to. The Shokai-sha's role is to stamp like, okay, this person, this company is worth doing business with. I feel they will not be a risk. And so, how do they know that? Well, we can't know anything for certain, but they have to have a feeling. The gut feeling, and in Japan, it's pretty important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So now let's flip it. You're in Düsseldorf, surrounded by 500 plus Japanese companies. What do they consistently get wrong about operating in Europe?
Okay, yeah. I was actually having a similar conversation the other day about this as well. I went to a big company based here, and I met the head of human resources who's German. And it was a very interesting example because the managing director is also German, although it's a Japanese company with 80,000 people worldwide. And she asked me the similar question. An example that came to mind was 5 years ago, I had a meeting with the head of a recruitment company who's Japanese, lived in Germany 30 years. And I said to her, what problems do German managers have? And he said, for example, you have a Japanese manager of a company in Germany, and they have a lot of local staff. They don't have all Japanese staff, of course, for cost reasons. Most local hires and a few Japanese expats. So you have the local German staff. 2 of them might come late one day, 5 minutes late. They say a quick Entschuldigung or nothing, and they start working. Now, if you're a Japanese boss, just starting new in the job, you're going to explode, As you and I know, in Japan, that's a cardinal sin. You have to get the slip of paper at the station if your train was really late, which is rare. And if you're really late for any other reason apart from medical emergency, you better be prepared for a really, severe apology, and a bowing. And if you don't do that, even if you're not Japanese, then, that's a very difficult thing for them to handle. So this kind of cultural clash of expectations, and I suppose working beyond 5 p.m., again, you and I know this, working beyond 5 p.m. is totally normal in Japan. In Germany, it's kind of like, 5 p.m. when we don't have the noisy thing, for the kids to go home to, what do you call that? The sound outside.
The school chime, right?
Yeah, school chime. I used to like that. Anywhere in the whole country.
At 5 p.m.
Yeah, kids go home. It's dinner time. But we don't have that. But Germans have this inner clock. It's like 5 p.m. I'm contractually obliged to stay here till 5 p.m. I'm not going to stay longer. And that's very different, and that kind of difference is difficult. And I think they'd have to be shown that the results can be achieved through a model which is different to Japan. But even though it's different, provided the company is doing okay, I think they could be persuaded, but it's difficult. That process can take time, Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so it's again that understanding the different culture, right? Like just as how Japanese companies would expect, their foreign counterparts to understand how things are done in Japan. They should also be willing to understand and learn culturally how things work in Germany or any other part of Europe or US for that matter, right? I want to talk about trade shows. You've attended a lot of trade shows, and you're probably there just observing things. And you could see cultural disconnects happening in real time on both sides. Can you share any stories, any examples of where you've seen moments of cultural disconnect between, the Europeans and Japanese and Europeans at trade shows, and what misunderstanding are you seeing happening?
Yeah, I mean, I can give a personal example, and I think it's good to be honest and transparent. I don't do everything perfectly. And myself recently, there was a show in Düsseldorf, and I also, whenever I have a show which I'm not working at, I think, well, potentially there should be some new customers here from Japan. They might be interesting. They might be willing to talk to me, or they might need what I have to offer. Some cases, yes. There was a medium-sized company from Osaka, and they're doing kind of they made some kind of I won't say exactly what they make, but anyway, they were a medium-sized company from Osaka, and it was a show about interior design. And they were exhibiting. They won about four Japanese companies exhibiting, and I contacted them in Osaka, and I said, "You're coming in 2 weeks. You have a great product, but you don't really have a German outlet. You have a Swiss distributor, but maybe we could talk about this because I'm a bridge. I'm in Germany. I know the market very well. I'd love to help you, and I know Kansai. I was 11 years in Kobe, so could we talk?" And I had a Zoom meeting, which I think went well. And so the manager said, "I'm in America till the last day of the trade show, but I'm back on the last day. So shall we meet?" So we did a bit more emailing to and fro, and I made time for the last day. And I prepare very well. When I go to these meetings, I literally, I look at everything. I'll look at all the YouTube videos, even the website. I like to have everything in my mind when I'm having a talk, so I take it quite seriously. I had to remind them to give me a pass for the show, which I suppose was a bit of a red flag, to get a voucher. Otherwise, you have to pay 50 euros to get in. And I'm thinking, you agreed to meet me, but I don't want to pay 50 euros for just having a meeting. So one of the ladies on the stand sent me the voucher, which they get when they exhibit. So I went to have a meeting. I felt it was a very cordial meeting, and I opened my laptop and I showed them what I do. And I said, no pressure, but I feel like, what do you think? Could you let me know? And, obviously, we'll go away and think about it. But then I thought, it's classic, you didn't get a yes, and I'm not going to get a yes quickly, but I felt like, in hindsight, he was agreeing to the meetings. He felt he had to. He felt he had to agree to the meetings I asked him, but they weren't in a buying frame for whatever reason. So I felt a bit frustrated that, not just my time was wasted. Well, I live quite close to the trade show, so, it could be worse, but my radar had not worked properly because, even though those of us who lived in Japan a long time, sometimes we cannot detect this kind of invisible message. And I don't know if you know the feeling, but it still happens sometimes. And it happened, and it's like, okay, next time we've got to be sharper,
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah. So German and Japanese business cultures, they both, put a lot of emphasis on precision, process, long-term thinking. This can sometimes create a false sense of alignment early on, right? For example, in Japan, you've got the Ringi system where you've got to get the hanko on a piece of paper, that kind of gets all approvals from key decision makers and so on. So have you seen in real time this breakdown where although, both business processes have a similar kind of rigorous, momentum, but behind the scenes, there could be tension?
Yeah, I feel like if you have, well, I mentioned Japan. Japan is the fastest aging, fastest shrinking market in the world. So they have a compelling need for new customers and new business. They have to move outside Japan. But there's one thing to be aware of it, and the other thing is to be able to do it, And as I mentioned, that most of the decisions in Japanese companies are made by people who are late 50s to 60s. And whether they like it or not, they are very conservative, normally very conservative, and not very well equipped to make the decisions quickly, which will allow these pipelines to open up quick. I think there are, parallels, and Germany and Japan are still manufacturing powerhouses, but the alignment takes longer than it would with other countries, because of these ringy processes take months, and maybe not years, but at least months. I think 6 to 12 months is normal, and I think that's quite unique to Japan. I don't think it happens in other countries. I mentioned Korea because, again, with the trade show example, you'll find much smaller countries very, very aggressively promoting themselves at trade shows. Two examples would be Korea and Netherlands. Netherlands is very small, and so is Korea. But if you look at the amount of booths they have and the amount of effort they put, it's really outsized. It's really huge. Austria has advantage. Austria offices all around the world. Japan has JETRO, but however forward-thinking the JETRO people in San Francisco are, the main decision is still made in Tokyo. and it's a governmental organization. So things don't happen fast. So I feel like the problem is time, and the alignment can happen, but it's literally the pace at which it happens is very slow. And for a lot of people in Europe, it's very hard to tolerate that. Well, one more thing about precision. Germany has a reputation for high precision, Ordnung, Audi, Vorsprung durch Technik, and so on, and car manufacturing. What shocks people when they come to Germany is German train system is appalling. I mean, honestly, I don't mind saying that. I've been spoiled on Japanese trains like yourself for decades, which is, I think, the average delay on the whole network is less than a minute. Now in Germany, about 50% of trains are delayed, and their definition of delay is if it's within 9 minutes, it's not delayed. It's still on time, which is shocking, right? This is true. So although Germany still has very strong companies like Siemens and Bosch and so on, the precision reputation has taken a knock, to be honest.
Very interesting. I didn't think of that. You talk about this strategic intelligence layer, and you say that it barely exists between Japan and Europe. What do you mean by that? And why hasn't someone built that? Is this what you're building?
Yeah. Well, very good question. Let's look at the articles I did, because that's why we're in touch in the first place. Maybe interesting for people. I have this thing I call rich reaching. My name is Richard, so rich and reaching, rich reaching. What is it? So basically, if I have an ecosystem, then how do I use the vehicle of a long-form LinkedIn article to get that ecosystem? What I would do would be, I'd either map out an event or an ecosystem. I'd get all the stakeholders in terms of the people, the entities and companies involved in that, the associations, what have you, in a big mountain. And then from that mountain, the human in the loop part is you select the people who are most relevant, valuable, and inside. Yeah, relevant, valuable, at least those two words. And from that bank of, typically 100 to 200 names of companies and people, I would make it into a narrative, which would be a long form article. Now, every time it changes, but it's not just like a tag fest or like, spam. There's nothing spammy about it. It's actually done strategically. And the thing is, if it was spammy, you get a lot of people pushing back and complaining. I very, very rarely get anyone complaining. I would say 0.05%. I occasionally get someone who said, can you take off the tag? Or could you update the description? But actually, people are mostly very happy. Why? Because I'm amplifying their message. I'm giving them my 10,000 counting audience, but also they have a unique chance to see their peers, because I do these articles very carefully. And inside the ecosystem, there are other companies they didn't know about, people they didn't know about. And they have a perfect chance now to reach out to them, because they can say, you were in the article, Richard's article. And I often find that. And I think it's really like, I don't know, it's organic. It's the best definition of organic, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good what you do. And yeah, that's how we connected, and I reached out and we had a good conversation, and here we are, right? So it's definitely working. It's definitely something that there's a need for. And so keep doing what you do. And, I would look forward to reading more of that. I want to talk a little bit about, on a personal note, and you shared with me, that you've chaired the PTA for 600 student Japanese elementary school. You volunteered at the Rugby World Cup, helping 2,300 England fans. And now you're coordinating rare disease research between Mount Sinai, Harvard, Riken, NCNP. So how do all of these experiences inform you about cross-cultural trust and building those relationships?
I think you have to have a really strong motivation to do these things. And maybe one of the reasons why I do these kind of intense social things like helping the fans or the PTA, well, the rare disease and the PTA were both related. I have two kids. My eldest son has special needs. I've written about him on LinkedIn, so it's fine to talk about it now. He's now 17. He has a very rare disorder, which we only found out about last year. Well, last year we got a diagnosis of his condition, which is FOXP1. It's very rare indeed. There's only about 1,000 or less people in the world who have this condition. And since then, it's been a big quest of mine to kind of shed light on it, educate myself, connect people, and so on. And so I go back to what I said, go big or go home. I cannot do things 50%. I have to do things 120%. And luckily, I don't know, genetically, I have a lot of energy and ideas, and I'd like to use it. And I feel that, honestly, if my son was neurotypical, I wouldn't have this energy. I consider myself full of fire. Where does it come from? Well, my son needs me. He's nonverbal and he's physically well, but mentally, challenged. So unless his dad is full of fire and doing these things, his life is not going to be as good as it could have been. So we moved around the world to find what we think is better care for him in Europe. And the rare disease thing, we found out last year after doing genetic tests in Munich, and I thought, I have to be in America. America's where the best doctors in the world, for all the troubles happening there, it still has the best doctors, the best scientists in the world. And there was a meeting in Boston of genetic scientists. So I said to my wife, I have to be there. There's 2 Japanese people going, one of the very few Japanese doctors who know about this condition. It's a great chance to meet them. So I found a way, I usually find a way. I found foundations, I got some sponsorship. And 1 month later, I was in Boston. I went to the meeting. Some of the material was very advanced, and I cannot say I understood it all, but I made great connections. They took me seriously. I applied my forensic research to preparing for that, and I got Harvard professors invited me to their receptions. I'm still in touch with some. There was a guy in Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. I went to New York from Boston, and I got half an hour with him, which was amazing because these people don't have time to spare normally. He sat down with me half an hour, and he revealed to me he has great interest in Japan. Just so happened to be traveling to Japan 2 weeks later. So I said to him, if you like, I'm happy to help you plan or, recommend some people. And in his field, Riken in Japan was the most relevant because he's a scientist and professor, and obviously it's a premier science institution in Japan. So I literally, I did some forensic research on him and on Riken, and I found the alignment. I emailed Riken, and literally he was allowed to do a half-day tour and a speech there, and I felt that was great. I felt, provided you do these things in a very laser-aligned way, you get the results, and that's been my experience so far. So yeah.
I must say, Richard, your tenacity is admirable, and this altruism to kind of get things happening and doing things, again, very, very admirable, and keep doing what you do. Just that getting that connection and helping that professor to go to Riken, not just have a tour, but also make a presentation. I'm sure you made his day, right? Because here you would have been trying to reach out to them, not knowing who to reach out to. Of course, professor to professor, you'll have certain, a level of access and whatnot. But those little connections you made, I'm sure you would have been blown away by, the opportunity to first meet you. So, kudos to you, and I wish your son, all goes well with him in a speedy recovery.
Thanks, Robert.
So I'd like to close us out. I've got a round of quick fire questions for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Cool. So what's the number one thing a European CEO should do before their first business trip to Japan? What would you tell someone who's visiting?
Patience, prepare culture, not language. Prepare culture over language, patience, forensic research, and that would be the things that come top of mind. We've discussed them before, but that for me is the thing. Yeah. YouTube, think beyond websites. YouTube, for example, these days, there are many tools where you can download videos, translate them. You have to be very creative when you're researching Japanese companies, because not on LinkedIn, as we said. So you have to find different ways to research them. But if you are creative, you can. So I think that effort is not wasted. Yeah.
Absolutely. Japan-Europe business corridor, do you think it's underhyped, overhyped, or misunderstood?
I think it's a work in progress. There's lots of potential, which is not realized. I'm doing my best to realize my part of it. And I think the best is yet to come. So, yeah.
Okay. LinkedIn in Japan, is it dead end or is it slowly changing? What are you noticing?
Very slowly changing. There are about 100 or 200 people in the office in Roppongi in Tokyo. I'm connected with most of them on LinkedIn itself, but I met them in the office. I know they're working hard, but it's like a big ship. It's turning very slowly. I think it will never. Maybe it's like football in Japan. It will never be the premier sport. It will never be top dog, but it can be bigger than it is now. And I think the Japanese who are on there have a real enviable blue ocean feeling, because not many of their peers are on there. And if they do it properly. One example quickly, I know it's quick fire, sorry, but there are a few Japanese CEOs. One of my articles was on which Japanese CEOs are on LinkedIn. Not that many, but the ones who are on have great impacts, like TDK, Rakuten, and a few more. Hitachi, for example, these three, just for example, it's unlike America and Europe where all the CEOs are LinkedIn, and Japan, not many are. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, you're right. It's slowly growing. I think they've hit the 5 million subscriber mark in Japan, which is good for them. And it's an important platform. I hope to see them do well. So, Richard, one final question. What's the one thing that you now know about Japan that you wish you had known in year one in 2002?
So when I first came to Japan, one of the things I would love to do would be in Tokyo, go to international parties. And back in the day, you used to come home with a pocket full of business cards. You had drinks. You felt like you're coming home with 10 or 15 new Japanese friends. You had a really good buzz, and they literally asked you for your contact details. So you felt, well, this is great. I have new people in my ecosystem, whatever. What you notice over time is this is all the kind of like giving the impression they think you want to see rather than their real feeling. Tatemai and honne. And what would have been useful would be developing this Tatemai radar earlier, but I think it's no shortcut. You can't really do it. It's a thing you have to live in Japan years to detect. But when you're first there, these events are very pleasant, but they're quite superficial, and you think they're not, but they are. I mean, everywhere in the world is like that, but in Japan more so. So I would think if I was doing it again, I would think not take it so seriously, because back in when I had a nice chat, I think I want to see this person again. X and Y, and they don't answer your message. And it's like, from our perspective, why do you bother talking to me for half an hour if you're not interested? It's funny, Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You got to experience it to know it. But Richard, thank you so much. This was a really good, honest look at, where Japan and Europe business corridor actually breaks down. And more importantly, what to do about it. And I think your point about this missing intelligence layer is something a lot of our listeners will recognize. And whether they are based in Tokyo or Düsseldorf or, Luxembourg, wherever they are. So thank you so much for your time.
No, pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been a really interesting discussion. As you said, no script needed. This is just going to the memory banks and thinking of the anecdotal things. The last point I would say is I always try to give people things which are not Googleable or AI generatable. It's more like personal experience, which you can't just, go on ChatGPT to find. So I hope I've given some of that to people listening, and thanks for the chance. Yeah.
Absolutely, you have. Thank you very much for listening or watching the Asia AIM podcast. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And I'd also like for you to give us a review. Reviews make a huge difference in how other people discover our show. Until next time, I'm Robert Heldt, and I'll be back soon with more conversations on how to win in Asia's dynamic and diverse markets. Goodbye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Asia AIM podcast. If today's conversation sparked new ideas or insight, be sure to subscribe, rate, and share the show. For more resources, tips on doing business in Asia, or to book a meeting with our team, visit asiaimpodcast.com. Stay curious, stay connected, and we'll see you in the next episode of Asia AIM.